As you can see by the title, in Original Wrath I was a rank 1 PvP player on Death Knight, as well as several gladiator titles on the class as well. My goal for Classic Wrath Death Knight is to live through the content I opted out for in Original Wrath, which is PvE. What would happen if I applied as much effort to PvE in Classic Wrath as I did back in Original Wrath for PvP? So follow along with me as I pursue a new goal, chasing rank 1 parses. What up bros, it's Bran, and welcome to Chapter 1 of my DK Guide series, Day 1 Unholy. When Classic Wrath of the Lich King PTR and shortly after live servers release, it will unlock optimal testing for the fine-tuning of the spec. If there is something someone is telling you about DK and Wrath with 100% certainty before Classic servers are out, they're full of shit. When Classic servers are launched, give it time for testing and the scalings of abilities will be found and the meta will shift. As it did in Classic Vanilla and Classic TBC, it will as well in Classic Wrath of the Lich King. Until then, there are question marks on some things and how they will function on Classic servers. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get right into it. Starting off with the basics, in Wrath of the Lich King, Death Knights have a two-part spender-builder playstyle. We spend runes to build runic power and then use runic power for either offensive or defensive abilities. There are 4 different rune types: Blood, Frost, Unholy, and Death. Death runes can be used as any of the other runes. We will use these runes for self-buffs, applying diseases, and those diseases will then increase the damage of our other abilities. We have 3 presences which are similar to warrior stances without the changing of action bars. Blood Presence, which is considered a DPS presence, gives us 15% damage, and 4% of our damage heals ourselves. Frost Presence, which is considered the tank presence, gives 8% stam, 8% less damage taken, 60% armor contribution, and increased threat generation. Unholy Presence is the other DPS presence, gives us 15% attack speed, 15% movement speed, and reduces the global cooldown on all abilities by 0.5 seconds. As Unholy, our raid utility is extremely powerful in Ebon Plaguebringer, which is a 13% magical damage increase to any target you have a disease on. Combining this with our ability Pestilence, which will spread our diseases to all nearby targets, makes Unholy DK highly sought after for raid comps. As Unholy, we will opt into the Master of Ghoul talent, which allows us to utilize a 100% uptime ghoul. We are able to heal this ghoul with Death Coil, which is extremely efficient for leveling especially. The ghoul has 4 of its own unique abilities. The abilities are Huddle, which acts as a shield wall, although the ghoul cannot move or act in any way while huddling. It will be cancelled at that point. Gnaw, which is a melee ranged 3-second stun. This ability is extremely important to not have on autocast, as you will want to determine when you are stunning a target. Claw. Claw is the damage source of the ghoul. I almost always have this on autocast in PvE, although it does cost 40 energy, so you could write a macro to turn off the autocast of Claw baked into the other ghoul abilities, so that the ghoul is not energy starved when you are trying to use one of the other 3 abilities. The final ability of the ghoul is Leap. Has a 5 to 30 yard range, and the ghoul will leap behind the targeted ally or enemy. I never have this ability on autocast as the ghoul leaps to the back of the target, so if a boss or enemy is running towards you, the ghoul actually loses a bit of uptime because after landing the leap he then has to chase the target. It's fine to cast Leap on stationary targets though. Summon Gargoyle is the Unholy 51-point talent, and this ability alone would be enough discussion for a video in itself. This ability is one of those question marks I was talking about earlier. We will discuss this in detail in the Gargoyle Snapshot section, but for now let's keep it simple. Summon Gargoyle is a 30-yard range targeted ability that will bring a gargoyle to aid you for 30 seconds when attacking an enemy. Now over to stats. For stats, our priority will be, of course, getting that hit cap up to 289, which will give us the spell hit cap for when we have a Boomkin or Shadow Priest in our raid. Then we will follow up with Strength, Haste, expertise cap, although, asterisk here, early on we will not push for the soft cap as the sacrifice is not worth the reward. And then armor pen, followed by crit. None of the stats are really bad for Unholy. We scale off each of them in their own way. Strength scales extremely hard with our abilities and our pet, especially when we consider things like Ravenous Dead, Endless Winter, Glyph of the Ghoul, Blessing of Kings, things like that. Haste is just an all-around effective stat for increasing DPS in many ways as an Unholy DK. Armor Pen will increase our physical damage, and crit scales our Wandering Plague. I will throw this in as well, but it is a very big question mark. In theory, you could consider completely disregarding hit cap and expertise cap as Unholy DK. Our missed, dodged, or parried rune abilities will refund the rune spent. It boggles my brain to think about this as being advantageous though, because even if we are getting a rune back, we still lost the global using that ability. And with Unholy, there's not very much downtime start to finish on a boss fight in our rotation. I'm unsure about this one, but I figured I would throw it in there for food for thought for you guys. Now on to talents. One thing I really love about Wrath of the Lich King Unholy Death Knight talent tree is there's no one cookie cutter, one size fits all build that just is best in slot for every scenario. There are a few talent points we can move around that will improve our single target or AoE damage, depending on what we choose. This is where dual spec comes into play, and I cannot tell you which spec is better yet because again, it is a question mark until we get those classic servers where we can fine-tune the spec with testing. Until then, I will list some of the options we have and discuss why these trees are taken. First, I want to focus in on the Unholy tree. Here is where you will define your build for AoE or single target. There are 3 different talents to choose from: Morbidity, Outbreak, and Blood-Caked Blade. You can only choose 2 of the 3. The only real guarantee before classic testing we can take right now is that for AoE, you will definitely want to pick up Morbidity, which most importantly reduces the cooldown of Death and Decay by 15 seconds, which is a massive DPS increase for AoE situations. Now, after you have determined your 54 points into Unholy, it is a decision between Blood subspec and Frost subspec. Blood subspec is currently considered to be the early game build. It juices our stats up because of the lack of gear at this point. We are missing a lot of the stats that we want. That's at least the idea behind it. You get Subversion, which is going to be 9% crit on your Blood Strike and Scourge Strike. Butchery is just a nice little runic power generation. Bladed Armor is just going to beef us up with a little bit more attack power. Two-handed weapon spec is just going to be 4% damage. And Dark Conviction is just going to be 5% crit. Just to give my honest opinion though on this spec, I fell out of love for this spec very quickly. The stats are nice, but even in early tier 7, my melees are doing a large portion of my damage. So the haste from the Frost subspec that we are about to talk about is very powerful for that melee damage. This will obviously be a concrete decision based on math when we have those classic servers to test on. Either Blood subspec or Frost subspec will do more damage, and I'm very interested to see which it is. Alright guys, so even if Blood subspec ends up being better for the early game for Death Knights, Frost subspec will 100% outscale it at some point. Using sims or testing, you will be able to find that breakpoint in your gear in which Frost subspec will take over. Jumping into what we get though from Frost subspec, this spec is just so Chad, man. I have personal bias with this spec over the Blood one. I know. It's whatever, but let's listen to what you get from this. 15% icy touch damage. You increase your maximum runic power by 30. You get 10% frost and shadow damage. You get 20% melee attack speed increase. And you get 4% strength, and your mind freeze no longer costs runic power, which is a DPS increase on fights where you have to kick shit. I'm on the Frost subspec team, guys. Frost subspec all day. I hope Frost subspec is just better right from fucking dinging level 80. I would play this spec the entire expansion. It's just so much fun. You'll see. So much fun, trust me. Alright guys, so I'm sure some of you would be interested in how I would do my talents and how I would take things while leveling to just optimize for faster leveling. So we'll just quickly get through the talents and we'll talk about some things. So if you know speed leveling in World of Warcraft and basically any MMO, movement speed is king. A lot of the time you're out there questing, a lot of the time spent is actually just traveling. So things like on a pale horse, which we normally would never take in a PvE scenario, we're absolutely going to prioritize because that's just going to cut down that movement, the amount of time we're traveling across the world, right? So grabbing on a pale horse, insta. We're going to get Knight of the Dead so that we can get Master of the Ghoul ASAP. Grabbing Holy Blight for a nice little DPS increase. Start grabbing Necrosis till Master of the Ghoul unlocks. Boom. Finish that off. Now we're back in Necrosis. Now we can start going into Impurity till Improved Unholy Presence unlocks, and this is another key movement speed thing that we want because we're going to be in Blood Presence while leveling, not only for the damage but also the lifesteal is going to give us a nice little bit of sustain. And now we're also throwing the 15% movement speed onto the Blood Presence, which again is just BIS for leveling. And we're going to go back into Impurity now and start putting points in the Blood Caked Blade. Grab that Bone Shield right away. Grip Fever. Grab another point in Blood Caked Blade. Scourge Strike insta. Grab all of Wandering Plague. All of Ebon Plaguebringer. But throw a few points into Rage of Rivendell until Gargoyle unlocks, and we're going to grab Gargoyle and then switch over to Blood and grab Butchery because Butchery is insane while leveling. And now we will jump back over to Unholy and finish off Rage of Rivendell. And grab Blood Caked Blade. And then we're going to go down into Subversion and basically go through and do our normal Blood 17-point Blood build there. Now things you want to keep in mind while leveling. We have Death Strike for self-sustain. We have Death Coil heals for pet sustain. And just understand how strong our AoE capabilities are. You can grab a lot of mobs around you as long as you can group them up nicely. Use LOS on ranged mobs, or just if they're all melee mobs, just let them all gather around you. Do that Icy Touch, Plague Strike, Pestilence to spread out the diseases, drop a Death and Decay, and then Blood Boil. You'll probably want to use Anti-Magic Shell or Icebound Fortitude while you're doing this, so you take minimal damage, and then all the mobs are just gonna die to that AoE burst. Yeah, leveling as an Unholy DK is insane. You'll see. Alright guys, moving on to Glyphs. We have Glyph of Icy Touch, which is going to increase the damage of our Frost Fever by 20%. I love this glyph because it affects both single target and AoE damage. So in my mind, it is an auto slot in till I'm proven otherwise. Glyph of the Ghoul is great single target glyph. Glyph of Death and Decay is an amazing AoE glyph. Must have AoE glyph for your AoE build. And then you also have the Death Coil glyph, which is going to be another single target glyph. For the AoE build, I would suggest dropping Death Coil glyph, especially if the targets you're AoEing die very fast. The Death Coil damage increase would be minimal. And when you're in a big AoE fiesta, there's a lot of random damage coming out sometimes. So having that increased stamina, as well as the strength from the Glyph of the Ghoul, can sometimes keep your pet alive where it would have died without it, which puts Raise Dead on a 30-second cooldown, which is a significant DPS loss. Alright guys, we're going to touch on Gargoyle snapshotting and rotations now. Gargoyle snapshotting is buffing your character with as much haste as possible before we press Summon Gargoyle. This is going to allow our Gargoyle to cast more times than it would if we did not do this. This is a massive question mark for me personally, and this will be the first thing I test when Classic servers arrive. For example, a Gargoyle with no active buffs, as we are in Blood Presence, is casting 14 times when I am testing it currently. Now, if I do the same thing again in Unholy Presence, it's casting 17 times. So I'm assuming you can kind of get the idea here. And the theory is you can use things like Bloodlust, Crowd Pummeler, Haste Pot, etc. to scale this gargoyle as much as possible. And if it works like we want it to, this will be a massive factor in our rotation. And then we would actually have to go out of our way to farm that annoying ass Crowd Pummeler. Now for rotation, the AoE rotation is extremely satisfying to pull off. We do an Icy Touch, which is going to apply our Frost Fever. We do a Plague Strike, which is going to apply our Blood Plague. And then we Pestilence to spread all those diseases to everything around us. And we drop a Death and Decay on top of all of them. And then we immediately Blood Tap into a Blood Boil. That's going to be your bread and butter AoE rotation. Now you can extend this further if you want to with an Empower Rune weapon, which I would immediately follow up with another 2 Blood Boils for the most AoE burst you can do. And then I would go from there, depending on how the fight is currently going, you would go from there with either dumping some Runic Power, or if something needs to die insta, you could Scourge Strike a couple times. You know, it just depends on the fight and where the fight is, how the fight is going at that point. Now for single target rotation, it's going to come down to that Gargoyle Snapshot, right guys? Like we've been saying, a lot of testing needs to be done still. So if the Gargoyle Snapshot does work, that's going to be your opener every single time. On boss fights, you'd run into your Gargoyle Snapshot into an immediate Empower Rune weapon. And then the idea here is you're basically maintaining your diseases, maintaining Desolation, which is from your Blood Strike. Then you want to make sure you're not overcapping Runic Power, so you're Death Coiling before you cap Runic Power. And then you're squeezing in those Scourge Strikes, putting that Blood Rune on cooldown with your Blood Strike, keeping Horn of Winter on cooldown as well for the Runic Power that it gives. And then you don't want to forget to use Blood Tap for a free rune reload. And what I mean by that is if both of your Blood Runes are on cooldown, you can Blood Tap and you will immediately refresh that Blood Rune into a Death Rune so that you can use it instantly. And then also you want to make sure you're maintaining your Bone Shield uptime, right? Alrighty. Alright guys, so I wanted to just go ahead and go over some of the pre-bis items for Unholy Death Knight. Pre-raid bis, so pre-nax bis. So the items you'll be searching for outside of your raid lockouts to fill in those slots. And I'll just go head to toe and then I'll try to give a couple options if there are some for each slot. Now, Spike Titan Steel Helm, also don't pay attention to my gems for some of these things because this is not the set I use anymore. Also, I'm missing 4 hit rating, and that's just because I don't have the socket bonus on this on these boots anymore, or else we would be at 291 hit, which is 2 hit rating above where we would want to be, which is close to perfect. Okay, so Spike Titan Steel Helm. This helm is so much better than the other options. I would really try your best to just get this helm. Save your gold for it. If you were going to spend gold on something for pre-raid bis on your Unholy Death Knight, it would definitely have to be this one for sure. Moving on to the next piece, we have neck piece, Titanium Impact Choker. I liked the Titanium Impact Choker early on because it gave me that flexibility for the hit rating because it has a gem socket on it. There's definitely an alternative that would cost you 0. It's just going to be a drop from Utgard Pinnacle. We'll jump on over there. From the last boss, it's going to be Gold Amulet of Kings. This is a very nice ring as well. Obviously, it's going to have that strength, which the Titanium Impact does not. And we talked about earlier just how much strength matters for DKs. So if you don't need the hit right away, Gold Amulet of Kings, great neck. For shoulders, it's going to be just a no-brainer. Snake Dance Balders are just better than the other options. It's got everything we want. Strength, haste, socket. Perfect. Cloak, we got the Cloak of the Bloodied Waters. This is a great cloak for Prebis as well. This is a BOE. You can just grab this off the auction house potentially. 60 strength, 34 crit. Nothing too crazy, but there's also nothing too crazy out there for us. All right, so for bracers, I'm rocking the Bands of the Stoneforge in my pre-bis set. 50 strength, 50 haste, just nice. The other option you could have is going to be the blacksmithing bracers, which are the vengeance bindings. We can compare them there, so you gain a little bit of strength. So basically comes down to if you need the hit, the vengeance bindings are going to be great for you. Now for weapon, it's going to be the Colossal Skull-Clad Cleaver. I believe this is from the last boss in Heroic Halls of Lightning. I mean, it's just got a flat 90 haste slapped on the bad boy, so it's pretty no-brainer in comparison to the other two-handers. The closest thing would be the Titan Steel Destroyer two-hander, but Colossal Skull-Clad Cleaver is going to take the cake here with the 90 haste rating flat on it. Now for chest piece and gloves, we're looking at getting the 200 item level tier set from badges is going to be our previous. This would be the first thing I would go for from badges. I would suggest is go get that chest piece and gloves, unless you're confident you're going to get the set quickly from your raid group, your guild group, however you guys are doing loot. Then I would hold off and maybe just grab the belt instead. All right, so moving on, I guess we'll jump right into the belt. This is the belt from the Emblems of Heroism. Amazing belt. We got strength, crit, haste, and it comes with a socket, and I have it belt buckled, which gives it an additional socket. So when you buy this belt, it will only have one socket on it, but you can add one onto any belt you want. So that's just how it works. Now the other belt that we have an option is Flame Bathed Steel Girdle. So if you're hurting on Emblem of Heroisms, or maybe you just don't want to farm them and you want something that's close to the power level, I would look at Flame Bathed Steel Girdle. That's going to be from, I believe, Nexus. Jump over to Nexus, I believe last boss. It's going to be right there, Flame Bathed Steel Girdle. It's a decent belt alternative. Now legs is going to be a no-brainer for us. Nothing really even close. It's going to be the staggering leg plates. It's just got 80 fucking hit on it, guys. That just sets us up, and I socketed with two 16 hit rating gems, so this single piece is giving us a majority of our hit rating in one piece. It's just nice to knock that hit rating out so you don't have to find it in other places. But if you really wanted an alternative, the Reputation legs from Wormrest Accord are going to be pretty good as well. 96 strength and then 90 armor pen. No sockets though. So staggering leg plates are just straight bis in my opinion, pre-raid bis. And that's going to come from Utgard Keep Final Boss Heroic. Now the pre-bis boots in my mind are going to be the Death Inord Sabatons. That's going to be from Ebon Blade Rep, Ebon Blade Exalted here, and these are just juicy. 50 strength, 66 crit, double socket with a socket bonus of 6 hit rating. Like I said earlier, when I had this socketed in my pre-bis, it put us exactly 291 hit rating. Now for rings, for the early game, once again, I like that flexibility, so I went with the Titanium Impact Band. If I'm hurting on gold, though, obviously I'm not going to be able to just grab all the Titan Steel type pieces, so I will give you guys some alternatives. But this is what I had in my pre-bis, because I wanted that hit early. And so we grabbed the Titanium Impact Band and Stained Glass Shard Ring. Now there are two alternative rings that you could grab. You got the Jewel Crafting Ring. That's going to be called Ring of Scarlet Shadows. This is a decent alternative. If you need that much hit in that slot, decent alternative here is Ring of Scarlet Shadows. And there's going to be one from the Nexus, I believe. Nexus. Not this boss. This boss. The Band of Frosted Thorns. This is another great alternative. Coming in with the 45 strength when my current rings don't have any strength on them. So it's definitely a decent alternative. Keep it in mind. Keep these 4 rings in mind and just get your hands on 2 of them that you can. And then figure out what you think is best from there. Now, Meteorite Whetstone is going to be one of the best items that you can get out of all of your pre-bis farming. If you were going to log on and only do 1 heroic a day, it would 100% if I'm voting for you, it would 100% have to be Utgard Pinnacle, and you're going for the last boss, Meteorite Whetstone. This item is just crazy. It's 74 crit on the equip, and the proc is 444 haste for 10 seconds. It's just bananas. I'm surprised this isn't like a Nax item, or you know, something further along the down the line, instead of just being able to farm this every day in a heroic. And then for your second trinket slot, you're gonna rock. If you need hit, you can rock the Sphere of Red Dragon's Blood. That's going to be from the Heroic Nexus last boss. So that's going to be a nice whopping 55 hit early on. Let's just display that real quick. Boom, drops from the last boss in Nexus, Sphere of Red Dragon's Blood. So keep that one in mind for when you need the hit. But once you put together more of the set, mainly once you get staggering leg plates and you have a lot of your hit in one spot, you can start replacing with some better items like Mirror of Truth. I replaced my sphere with Mirror of Truth. And then eventually you're going to want to replace this Mirror of Truth with the Dark Moon card deck. Greatness for strength. This one here. So this is an insane trinket. This is going to most likely be your biz throughout the entire phase. Probably replace it in Old War at some point. But it's 90 strength base and then procs 300 strength. It's just insane. It's just a crazy, crazy Dark Moon card. As far as sigils go, though, we have options. We have the emblem, which I'm using currently. This is going to be 173 crit rating proc from your Blood Strike. Or you can go ahead and go to the Grizzly Hills, do the PvP daily at the Grizzly Hills area. And there are 3 sigils there. You got the Scourge Strike, base damage. You got damage dealt by your Icy Touch, and you got damage dealt by your Death Coil. Now, with how it's hard to say right now what would be best, obviously with testing, like I've said a million times now, I'm sure you're over it, but also depending on what spec and what glyphs you're running, like if you're running Morbidity for the increased Death Coil damage, and you're running the Death Coil glyph, then that Death Coil sigil starts to sound a lot better, right? So keep that kind of stuff in mind with when you're looking at sigils. For me, though, I kind of just like that crit rating proc. It's pretty fucking juicy, in my opinion. But yeah, that's going to be it for the pre-bis, guys. Alright, guys, and lastly, I just wanted to make some quick comments about profession and race choices for Unholy Death Knight. So professions, in my mind, it's pretty simple. The bis setup is just going to be jewel crafting engineering. Engineering being nearly unbeatable for parsing in raids because of all the things it brings, like sappers. You also get a haste on use for your glove enchant. You get goblin rocket boots for just uptime on bosses, and mobility is just very nice, as well as other things that you bring along with NG. NG is just full of tools. Now, jewel crafting is going to give you 54 strength when you have these kind of gems here that I have in my chest piece. 54 strength. Now, keep in mind everything we said about strength previously in the video. We know how hard strength is going to scale our character at this point. So the only possible sleeper profession that could maybe replace jewel crafting would be tailoring, with the sword guard embroidery like I have here. I can show it. It is a 400 attack power proc for 15 seconds. Now, I still don't, this is definitely not beating engineering. I'm trolling by not being engineering. So it would be replacing jewel crafting for parsing. For all the reasons I said before, engineering is just way too powerful. But the uptime on this buff would have to be completely bonkers for it to beat out the jewel crafting permanent 54 strength that you gain. Now, for races, for min-max, there's really only a few choices in my mind. For Horde, you're either going Orc or Troll. Troll would be the sleeper pick, the sleeper OP, potentially OP pick if all this, the Gargoyle snapshotting and whatnot works as it does on some of these other servers. Troll could be insane, but Orc is definitely the safe pick. Orc is always just going to be good. Blood Fury is very good. You get the pet command as well. 5% more pet damage. It's just nice. And then you also get the expertise when you have axes, and that's going to be Bis when you have Shadowmourne, yeah? So, go work if you're planning on getting Shadowmourne. Now for Alliance, you can go Human or Draenei. In my mind, I would just always go Human. You get free expertise with that as well. And the Human Racial on Use PvP trinket, every man for himself, is going to be a DPS increase sometimes when you need to get out of something, whether it be a slow, root, snare, or any CC, stun, whatever it is, it can be a DPS increase. If you look at it that way, then Human is definitely going to be better than the 1% hit from Draenei that somebody else could just be giving you, right? Alright guys, well, that's going to be it for the video. I really hope you learned at least something from the video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. Drop a comment. You have any questions, or you just want to talk World of Warcraft, I'd be really happy to have a conversation with you in the comments. Let me know what you guys think about the video, and you guys have a great day. Peace, everyone.